UFC Fight Night, Felder versus Dos Anjos, coming up this Saturday, and we're breaking down every single fight. Don'Tale Mayes, minus 220, coming in against Roque Martinez, who comes back at plus 180. Don'Tale Mayes, 0-2 in the UFC. Did have some success with strikes in his last fight against Nascimento, but could not put him away. He was completely outclassed by Cyril Game 2 fights back, where he was caught in a heel hook. Roque Martinez, 0-1 in the UFC, got played with essentially by Alexander Romanov in his first fight, but it does look like Alexander Romanov is quite the serious prospect, so it's tough to read too much into that. Just based on the tape, Don'Tale Mayes looks to be the better athlete, and I can't really see Martinez taking advantage of Mayes' inefficiencies on the ground. Straight off the bat, this is not a great betting fight, but even at minus 220, I think I would still go with Don'Tale Mayes. That's going to be the pick for the first fight. On to the next. Geraldo de Freitas Jr., plus 150. Tony Gravely coming back, minus 175. Geraldo de Freitas, 1-1 in the UFC, did lose a tight split decision last time out. I personally think he won. Solid wrestling game, as was shown in his first UFC fight where he got 6 takedowns. His defensive wrestling isn't super great, but he is pretty good at getting back to his feet. Tony Gravely, 0-1 in the UFC, lost in his last fight via third-round rear naked choke to Brett Johns. Despite being 0-1 in the UFC, Gravely was very impressive in his run-up into the UFC in some solid organizations outside of the UFC. Gravely also lost to a guy in Johns who is on a completely different level to the guys Geraldo has been fighting, and I can see Gravely getting the better of Freitas here, likely via a decision. This is a good one. Randa Markos, plus 140. Kanako Murata of Japan, minus 170. Randa Markos, 6-7-1 in the UFC. He's got some useful submission skills and is absolutely tough as nails. She's also gone up against the cream of the crop of the division, with especially her last 2 fights against Mackenzie Dern and Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas looks like a possible future champion. Murata, on the other hand, it's her UFC debut, has fought some seriously legit competition in Invicta, though, so this is not a massive step up. She is quite good on the ground, winning 4 of her 11 career victories via submission. It's technically a giant step up for Murata, but not because she's going from Invicta to the UFC, but because she has an awfully tough first fight to make in the UFC against someone with Ronda's experience. I think that experience is going to pay off for Randa big time here. I think she can win a pretty tight decision, and at plus 140, that seems like a pretty good shot to take on Saturday night. Next up, we've got Jose Quinones coming in at plus 110 against Luis Smolka, coming in at minus 138. Jose Quinones, 5-3 in the UFC, did get destroyed by Sean O'Malley last time. But that does seem to be Quinones' MO. He seems to beat the guys you feel he should beat and loses to the top prospects. Just based on the tape, I'm not a big fan of Quinones' skill set, and he may struggle against Smolka here. Smolka comes back 2-2 in the UFC, coming off of a loss against Casey Kenny, but that does not seem quite as bad now, with Kenny looking incredible in his last fight. The one thing I really like about Smolka here is his ability to hurt Quinones, as Smolka hits seriously hard for the division, and I can see him getting to Quinones here and possibly knocking him out. Also love the price here, as I would have had Smolka in the minus 180 range, so I think you are getting at least a little bit of value there on Smolka on Saturday night. Next up, Alex Morono, minus 188, Rise McKee, plus 162. Alex Morono, 6-3-1 in the UFC, lost to Chaos Williams last time out by KO in 27 seconds, which ended his 3-fight win streak. Chaos Williams, a person we'll be talking about later. Morono does not possess a ton of power, however, but is dangerous on the floor, and I fully expect him to try and get this one to the ground. McKee, on the other hand, 0-1 in the UFC, but that should not really play into our handicapping here, as that loss came to Khamzat Chimaev, We all kind of know his trajectory. The fights before that were out of the UFC, but it was impressive as he was on a 3-fight winning streak in Cage Warriors coming into the UFC. All 3 of those wins for McKee in Cage Warriors were finishes, and I can see him doing the same thing to Morono here, as I have really liked what I have seen on tape, and plus 162 is a great price in this spot. Morono does have decent hands, or not the best. Not a ton of power, like I said before, but I can really see McKee piecing him up. I like his boxing quite a bit. And I know Morono's going to try to get it to the ground. I'm not sure if he's going to actually be able to get it there. Plus 162 on McKee. I'm not going to knock him too much for losing to Chimaev, because I'm pretty sure Morono would lose to Chimaev too. So, McKee for me here, plus 162. Nice solid underdog price. We move on. Ashley Yoder against Miranda Granger. This is a pick'em fight, minus 110 apiece. Ashley Yoder, 2-5 in the UFC, has only ever gone to decision despite having some decent ground skills. Overall, on the tape, not impressed with Ashley Yoder whatsoever. Miranda Granger, 1-1 in the UFC, coming off of a rough loss against Amanda Lemos, as she was subbed in a little under 4 minutes. Yoder has not really beaten anyone of note in a while. Her most impressive part of her UFC career is probably her loss to Mackenzie Dern. She managed not to get submitted, which is honestly impressive. But at these current prices, I would much rather take the younger and hungrier fighter who I just believe in her a lot more. And she has a lot more room to get better, too. I don't think Ashley Yoder has a ton of room to get better. So minus 110 seems an awfully square price to take on, like I said, the younger, hungrier fighter. We move on. Brendan Allen against Sean Strickland. Another minus 110. Pick'em fight. Brendan Allen, 3-0 in the UFC, and has looked seriously good in almost every aspect of his game. He was most impressive against Tom Breeze, who he finished via KO in the first round. It was 2 back. Strickland comes back 8-3 in the UFC, coming off of a semi-impressive fight against Jack Marshman, who he made to look pretty silly, but Marshman, on the other hand, is not really a legitimate UFC fighter either. He's also taking this fight on only 2 weeks' notice, so that shouldn't be a problem, given how that last fight went, but it's not ideal either, especially in a fight that's a pick'em. Those are things you take into account when 2 guys are so close to each other skill-wise, and the bookies think that, obviously, with a pick'em. Strickland obviously looked great in that return to the UFC off his 2-year layoff, but that fight is not enough for me to believe he should be favorite over a hot prospect like Brendan Allen. I think Brendan Allen has a lot of ways to get the job done here, and I think he gets it done by decision. Pretty, 30-27, 29-28. Pretty solid decision here, minus 110. Again, pretty darn solid price. So, Eric Anders, minus 150, up against Antonio Arroyo, plus 120. Eric Anders, 5-5 in the UFC. Anders had a tough opponent in his last fight as he lost to Krzysztof Jotko in a decision where Anders deservedly lost, but did have his moments in that fight. He will look to get things done with his hands here, and although he has decent hands, he may find Arroyo hard to finish. Our boy Arroyo, man, he's got a good chin. So Anders going out there looking for the knockout, that might not happen. So Arroyo, plus 120, decent price, 0-1 in the UFC. Although he did win 2 fights on Dana White's Contender Series. Expect him to use his BJJ here, and I get this fight to the ground, and I think that's going to be critical, and I think he will be able to get this one to the ground. Do not see Arroyo getting knocked out, looking for the takedown, and at that current price of plus 120, I think it is worth paying to see just how effective Arroyo can be in this spot. On to the next. Kay Hansen, minus 220 against Cory McKenna, plus 180. Start with Hansen here, 1-0 in the UFC. 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu product, has great BJJ skills, obviously. She used those skills to great effect against Jin Yu Fry, who she beat last time by armbar. She also showed her toughness, as Frey did hit her with some solid shots in that fight. So I'm not terribly worried about her chin, which I was a little bit worried about coming into the fight, but she showed enough there for me to think it's unlikely for her to get knocked out. Cory McKenna actually does have like some decent hands, like decent power for 115 women, so it's not impossible. McKenna, on the other hand, UFC debut, looked pretty solid in her Dana White's Contender Series fight, and impressively, she does have straight-up knockout power. So it is a path for her. Kay Hansen did have a better chin than I thought, so it's tough to say. That would be her main path here, is piecing her up, maybe getting the KO, maybe getting the decision, keeping this on the feet. I like Hansen here, but I feel like we will get a pretty awesome price if we want to get sneaky for this one not to get to a decision. It's like I said, Hansen's chin I thought was pretty darn decent, but McKenna does have a knack for knocking chicks out. Hansen, on the other hand, can get the submission, and if we're getting a really, really high price on this not to go to a decision like I think it's going to be, I think that's the way that I would go in this fight. For the purposes of the video, I'm going to go with Hansen, minus 220. I think she probably gets the submission victory. But, you know, I would keep an eye on that other prop bet. Moving on. So, Julian Marquez, minus 300, up against Saparbek Safarov, coming back at plus 230. Julian Marquez, 1-0 in the UFC with one Dana White's Contender Series win and one tough final loss that came as a split decision. Has looked very good based off of what I have seen. And this guy hits seriously hard. Like, that's the number one thing to notice about the guy. If he hits you, you feel it. Safarov, on the other hand, 1-3 in the UFC. Have been thoroughly unimpressed with Safarov so far, and I do not see him improving enough to really contend with Marquez. The minus 300 price is deserved, in my opinion, on Marquez, and it probably should be a lot lower than that. I would not be surprised by a first-round finish either if you are looking for plus money on this fight. I would probably be looking at that. I couldn't find any props on that on the site that I use. So look out on Fight Night. Julian Marquez maybe gets it done in the first round if the price is right. Moving on. Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, minus 225, going up against Chaos Williams, who comes back at plus 187. Abdul Razak, 4-2 in the UFC, and this dude must really be wondering what planet his last opponent, Munir Laziz, was from. He hit the guy with so many strikes in that first round, and he just kind of took it somehow. Al-Hassan was on a 3-fight KO streak before that one, and you can certainly see why. 99.9% of humans would have been separated from their consciousness if they endured what Al-Hassan brought in his last fight in round 1. The one problem for Al-Hassan, gas tank, gas tank, gas tank. That's why he lost the last fight. If he could have kept going at the same clip, he would have got the job done by decision, even if he didn't knock Laziz out. So, we have to see. This could be a question. Chaos Williams, plus 187, 1-0 in the UFC, and was super impressive in his UFC debut, knocking out Alex Morono, who also fights on this card. Knocked him out in 27 seconds. Doesn't get better than that for a UFC debut. Chaos also has seriously good hands, but his hands do not possess the raw power that Al-Hassan has. So this fight very well could come down to whether or not Williams can survive the first round. And that begs the question, do I think Williams is going to survive the first round? My answer, no. Just like the last one, it's another one that I would look at. Al-Hassan in the first round. It's tough to see him based on his gas tank, which it's tough to improve. I don't see him, I don't see Chaos Williams being able to take the same amount of punishment as Laziz did. Al-Hassan, first round knockout. For the purposes of the video, just on the money line, minus 225. Seems all right with me, because I cannot see him getting out of that very critical first round. Move on to the main event. Paul Felder, plus 162 up against RDA, or Rafael Dos Anjos, minus 188. Paul Felder, 9-5 in the UFC and coming off a pretty heartbreaking main event loss against Dan Hooker, where he was outpointed, but in my book did the more severe damage. I do worry about him taking that kind of punishment in his last fight, now that he comes in against a guy like RDA, but he does seem to consistently find himself in absolute wars, and by now, maybe he's got one left in him. Who knows? If Paul Felder loses this fight, I do kind of expect him to retire. He's got a pretty good gig in the commentary box. He's pretty good at it. He could do that for a long time. So that would be my expectation here, should Paul Felder lose, and possibly if he wins too. I don't know how much more of this he actually wants. Rafael Dos Anjos, 18-11 in the UFC. Obviously a veteran. We've seen a lot of him over the years. He has lost 4 of his last 5 fights, and although his last loss to Quezada was a bit worrying, has been almost exclusively to the absolute top of the division. This does, seem to feel like the end of the line here for Felder, and now with him taking this fight against RDA, who I still believe has enough in the tank to get the job done here, and given where the money has gone in this fight, I think this opened like close-ish to a pick'em, and we're already down to minus 188 on RDA. I'm rolling with RDA here, even at minus 188. I mean, the value, most of it's probably gone, but I also expect that this price is going to be gone by fight night. I expect more money to keep coming on Rafael Dos Anjos, so I would get on that earlier rather than later, and thank you for making it to the end of the video. We appreciate it. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. We tried to zip through these as quick as we possibly can for you guys. All the work on the back end has been done, getting all the UFC fights broken down with picks in under 20 minutes. Not here to waste anyone's time. Want to zip through it, get you guys the picks for fight night. If you like this kind of stuff, stick around, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow us on Twitter on the House Pick 1 or Instagram on the House Picks. Leave a comment, that would be cool. Let us know maybe your best bet of the night, who you're cheering for. Best of luck on Saturday, and we will see you next time.